Eric, and as the situation on the ground in Kabul rapidly deteriorates, U.S. forces there are rushing to evacuate all personnel from the embassy. Afghan President Ashraf Ghani's departure signals the government has all but handed power to the Taliban. Trey Yingst is live in Jerusalem with the very latest. Trey, what more can you tell us?
Arthel, good afternoon. As we speak, Taliban fighters are working their way through the Afghan capital, and it's extremely tense. According to reports, there are images online coming out right now inside Kabul, the presidential palace overrun by the Taliban. As you noted, U.S. officials have confirmed to Fox News that Afghan President Ashraf Ghani fled the country. The question now is what happens next. There are a number of embassy personnel making their way to the airport in Kabul, trying to ensure that the process to get all of the personnel out of the country runs smoothly. But there are major concerns by U.S. officials that there could be attacks on the airport, and even conversations happening right now in Washington about reinforcing the 5,000 American forces that are there helping with the evacuation. Some concerning images out of Afghanistan today. Bagram Air Base, where there were more than 5,000 prisoners held. All of those prisoners released by the Taliban today, among them not only Taliban insurgents, but also al-Qaeda fighters. Certainly a concern to the civilian population in Kabul and across Afghanistan, who will see very quickly the Taliban reinforce their ranks and then ultimately, as the group has made clear, reinforce Sharia law across the country. This is extremely concerning to the population, especially women, who will be required to cover their faces. They will not be permitted to work in traditional roles. And you will see the country of Afghanistan take steps backwards, decades, an extremely unfortunate situation for a country that previously saw a lot of opportunity, will now be under Taliban control within the coming hours. Arthel?
It's absolutely extremely unfortunate. You know, was the Ghani administration, Trey, caught as flat-footed as the Biden administration has been as to how quickly the Taliban would overtake the country?
I think everyone was caught on their heels with this situation. Over the past 8 days, we saw the Taliban take over 31 of the 34 provincial capitals across the country, and they implemented a plan that was extremely well executed in a way that previously was downplayed by U.S. officials. We heard President Biden say earlier this year that the Taliban had around 75,000 fighters who would be no match for the Afghan security forces that numbered on paper around 300,000 people. The reality was much different on the ground. The Taliban very quickly took over cities in the southern part of the country, which required Afghan security forces to bring in reserve troops, at which point the Taliban then took over cities in the northern part of the country. Many of them, they actually just walked in and claimed victory. So this was a situation that many could not have predicted, but you have to ask, did the U.S. intelligence community have any firm understanding of what could happen on the ground? Just days ago, their prediction was that Kabul would fall in 90 days. Then that was moved to 30 days and then just 72 hours. And as we see now, there are Taliban fighters across the Afghan capital. Arthel?
Yeah, and now, Trey, as you're reporting, they've released prisoners, thousands of them. So do you anticipate any trouble with these evacuations?
It's certainly a concern for the American troops on the ground, and that's why those conversations are ongoing about potentially reinforcing the people who are trying to secure the Kabul airport. One thing to note is the Biden administration has promised to implement a visa process. This visa process is known as the Special Immigrant Visa Program, and it would allow many of the people who have helped American forces over the past 20 years to get out safely, because those are the people who will be targeted, the interpreters, the translators, the people who helped American forces and Afghan security forces over the past 20 years. According to reports, only a fraction of the people who have applied for these visas have been processed and ultimately airlifted out of the country. And the Biden administration doing everything they can right now to make an already extremely difficult and hard situation easier. But as it stands now, there is really no practical way the United States is going to be able to assure protection for the thousands of Afghans who helped them over the past 20 years. And the implications of this are really far-reaching, because while the Taliban has come out with these statements ensuring safety and security for any foreigners or locals who helped the Americans over the past 20 years, the reality on the ground will likely be much different. Once they take control and are able to implement their own justice system, we are likely to see the return of things like public executions, a judicial system that implements punishments like public stoning, cutting off limbs of people who are accused of stealing, really taking the country back decades. And that's the major concern, that these individuals who helped the American troops and forces over the past 20 years will be the first to face the brutality of this organization, the Taliban. Arthel?
Trey, I have one more question for you, if you don't mind, Eric, and that is, already there are reports that China is ready to swoop in and acknowledge the Taliban as the official government of Afghanistan. How does that impact the situation in the region? What does that look like for America on the geopolitical stage?
Well, it's a major loss for the United States if the Chinese are able to quickly build relations with the Taliban. They've tried to, as an organization, come across as a group that will ultimately be able to have a government that can engage with the international community. The two big players that the Americans should be concerned about are the Russians and the Chinese. The Chinese have very quickly come out and indicated they will ultimately recognize the Taliban as the legitimate government of Afghanistan. The Russians originally, there were reports about people in Moscow and top Kremlin officials saying that they would recognize the Taliban, but they've since walked those statements back, trying to see how things play out with these evacuations and ensuring that they're not getting ahead of what's unfolding on the ground. But it's a major concern when you step back and look at it from a 30,000-foot view, because if you look to the west of Afghanistan, you are looking at the country of Iran. And Iran is certainly of concern to the United States and its allies in the region. And when you think about China's efforts across the Middle East and across East Asia, this will give them an opportunity to actually have a pipeline of supplies, goods, and other relations with not only the Taliban and those in control of Afghanistan, but also a closer land bridge to the Iranians. Arthel?
Yeah. Very complicated. I have more, but we have to move on for now. Trey Yingst, thank you very much.